Hey, I'm Jeffrey Masters, and today on the podcast, we are tackling HIV criminalization laws. Over 30 states in the U.S. have such laws on the books, and these can look like a lot of different things depending on where you live. Some cover not disclosing your HIV status before having sex with someone. That can be a felony even if transmission doesn't occur. And some states have laws that will send someone living with HIV to prison simply for spitting or biting, even though, and I want to be clear, even though those actions do not carry any risk of transmitting the virus. And so today, I want to introduce you to Robert Suttle, who has firsthand experience with these laws. Robert was accused by a former partner of not disclosing his status, a claim he denies, and Robert went to prison. But since getting out, Robert has become a really fierce advocate. He co-founded the Zero Project, which works with those directly impacted by HIV criminalization laws, and he also is a national advocate for the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation. So without further ado, this is LGBT Q&A with Robert Suttle. So you were 24 when you discovered that you were living with HIV.
Yes.
Can I ask, what year was that?
That was 2003.
2003. Okay. I asked that because at the time, was it still considered, like, in your mind at least, like a quote unquote like death sentence?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, that is my understanding, or at least was my understanding of it then. My understanding of HIV was very limited, but it seemed so distant from me. And so
Distant? Why?
I would say I would have thought that maybe I wouldn't be the person that would ever contract HIV because I felt responsible. I felt aware to some degree. Not that I judged people or had a judgment towards anyone. I just didn't think that for me, I would have, because I didn't know what it took or what it meant other than sexual activity, but just understanding the risk and routes of it and like what exposes you to contracting HIV.
Yeah. With medication back then, in 2003, you said, right? Mm-hmm. You would have been undetectable, but that was not something that, like, we didn't understand that back then, right? Mm-hmm. There was like a massive education for the public that hadn't happened yet.
Right. I didn't know anything about that, anything about treatment and the effectiveness of it. I remember in 2003, I was actually taking a cocktail, 3 pills. I currently take 1 pill today, but I was taking at least 3. So I can only imagine for someone before me, those many years, people are taking many pills.
I assume once you started on medication, you were told you cannot transmit this, right? Were you having to be the one educating people in your life and community, I cannot transmit this?
No, I was not. I didn't know anything. Yes, I was on treatment. I knew they said that the doctor told me that I could go on and live a healthy life.
Yeah.
And so that is the thing that stood with me. I was in a state of shock as I was learning about my diagnosis and also getting into care. I immediately went into care. But no, I didn't find myself educating people because I didn't know what to say or how to educate them other than I'm on treatment. And also you have to understand that being newly diagnosed, I wasn't automatically given the skills to negotiate how to disclose my status. I knew HIV was something that nobody really wanted, but I hadn't met anybody to tell me this is how you do it or this is what you should do or not do. So that's where I was. Yeah. But to treatment, that wasn't even registering other than, okay, this is what I need to do for me.
That's so interesting because I believe it is that people have been able to reach an undetectable viral load since about 1996. That definitely became more common and sustainable with drugs, though, in the early 2000s. And then undetectable equals untransmittable, U equals U. That phrasing, it didn't begin until 2016, and then was formally adopted by the CDC in 2017. And so there is this 20-ish year period where people couldn't transmit HIV if they were on appropriate medication, but we didn't know it. The general public didn't know it because that wasn't publicized. And to me, that is just such a massive failure.
Jeffrey, I feel like you are onto something because actually, and I won't go in great detail about it because I have to go and study that history, but it was 2008. I don't know if you ever heard of the Swiss statement.
No.
It was a statement that was in the sort of the global realm, the global spaces, where I think it was a scientist that discovered that HIV, with their effective treatment, that HIV could not be transmitted. So to your point about the 20-year, it's like I think would have known this way sooner. And 2008 was one of those years, and 2008 was another pivot in my life where my life changed. And so it's interesting how 2016, 17 with U equals U being introduced, how like, wow, we've had this solution all this time, but because it was in sort of the global space, our country here in the U.S. did not, or maybe the rest of the world did not fully accept that because people's understanding around HIV is always, out of fear and misunderstanding.
And so you alluded to your life changing in 2008. That's when the court case, I guess, began. When did you first learn that your former partner had gone to the police?
I learned by a phone call. It was a phone call that had left a message, and it was from like the police department or from a detective. I didn't really know how to respond to that because they're not telling you exactly why they're calling. They're just saying, this is a matter. Would you please call us back at XYZ number? I literally ignored it in a way because I didn't know. The way they left the message, it was as if someone, like a marketer basically, was just leaving a message. So you're like, I'm not going to call that back. I'm not interested. But that is the initial moment that I learned that beyond them threatening that they were going to, press charges, it was a matter of waiting for when. And for me, the when came when I got the voicemail that I ignored it. I didn't know how to respond to it, to be honest with you. But that was the initial moment that I realized, like, oh, something's off here.
Yeah. So you ignore the voicemail, and then what happens next?
I ignored the voicemail, and I think from there, maybe he reached out to me back and forth saying things like, oh, you ought to turn yourself in, and you ought to be ashamed of yourself. These sorts of things, just sort of threatening and harassing me.
That was your former partner?
The former partner,
okay.
Yes. And so with that, and then the next thing I knew, I was at work, and these people show up at the office. They only asked me a question. The only question they ever asked me was, did I know this person? And I said yes. I didn't deny it. But I couldn't talk in greater detail with them because I was at work. I work at the court, so we're busy. And again, this is like March, April, May, when they visited me. And then the next thing I know, I came home, and there was a document on the counter, which was a search warrant, a copy of the search warrant that they had. And it just detailed the things that they looked at or things that they had taken as far as evidence to try to demonstrate that I was, in fact, living with HIV.
And just for the audience, you were accused by this former partner of having sex with him without disclosing your HIV status,
Correct.
Which was illegal in Louisiana at that time.
Correct.
And so I'm just a little bit surprised, like, why would they need to search your home?
That was their way of getting the proof, at least investigating my home for any type of documents or anything related, to show proof that this person is saying that I exposed them to HIV. Okay, well, let's go find.
And that was before they had a conversation with you even, the police?
Yes.
Where you could have even just like offered up, yes, actually.
Yeah, because remember I said the only conversation I ever had was that I knew the person.
Wow.
And that was it.
And so this person saying that you did not disclose your status to him, you say, I did disclose. Like, how do you prove that in court of law? It's just like he said versus he said, right? Like, was there any proof offered by the police?
That's a good question, and that is the hard part about this, is that a person living with HIV, simply because they are HIV positive, they're automatically assumed guilty just by virtue of their health status. It's not about whether you actually maliciously intended, or set out to do it. If you are in fact living with HIV and you know it, and someone accuses you of exposing them to HIV or not disclosing it, then that is enough to make you criminally liable.
And I think it's important to say that, as we said, you were undetectable. So, like, just scientifically, you could not transmit it.
I would say I was on treatment.
Sorry.
Because back then we wasn't saying undetectable.
Gotcha.
But, yeah.
Back then, or I guess what I should say is that there was no transmission of HIV.
There was no confirmation by the courts or anything that confirmed that I actually transmitted HIV to the former partner.
Do you ever talk to him about, like, why he did this?
No, I have not spoken with him. In fact, the courts in their order stated that no contact with the victim. But no, not to this day. I've not had conversations with him.
It's just really scary to like live back then, to have HIV and to worry that any sort of disgruntled partner might, go to the police.
Yeah, absolutely. Or even an encounter with law enforcement. The laws have now been expanded in a way that now if you expose a law enforcement or a first responder even, which is kind of ridiculous. So if you are exposing them to HIV, the charge could be elevated or the sentence can be elevated. So
yeah.
So there's really no protections for the person living with HIV who's facing accusations. There's no protection in the law.
And so you ultimately took a plea deal. Can you talk about your thinking behind that and why that was like the right choice for you?
The plea deal is something that most people tend to take in these situations because for me, I was looking at up to 10 years in prison, and some people it's more than that. And you don't really know what's going to happen to you in this outcome. And so you just try to find a way to get less time as possible. And for me, I knew I just wanted this thing to be over. Wherever it was going, whatever it was doing, it had already done enough to me that I just wanted over. And if I had known what I know now, then I definitely would have fought it. Because the responsibility is the burden is put on me to prove that I was, that I disclosed. But really, the burden needs to be put on the prosecutor for whatever reason they're choosing to bring charges forward. So the plea deal is something that's very common, and it makes the job for the prosecutor easier when you just accept a plea deal. And we're not looking at the nuances or the facts of these situations other than this accusation. They didn't look at whether I was in care, whether I was undetectable, or whether I used the condom, like none of those things. Did I actually intended to transmit or expose this person to HIV? None of that is considered.
Yeah. And so you went to prison for 6 months. Were you able to be out, like, of the closet when you were in prison?
Yes, I was eventually sentenced to 6 months. I did not say a whole lot when I was incarcerated. Again, another space that I did not understand. There's no orientation for you to go to prison or jail. There's no orientation. However, there is maybe a manual, a handbook of some kind, but there's rules that people who are incarcerated have for themselves and that the facilities have as well. And you don't necessarily know all those rules because they don't really tell you until you do something that they, eventually realize like, oh, that's not how it goes here. But I didn't say very much because I didn't know what to say. All of that whole experience was still a shock for me. So I had been in a state of shock for a long time as I look back. But I didn't say very much. And one, because I didn't know what to say. And then two, I know people would say all sorts of things about HIV. It was already hard enough that they were separating me just because I was identified as a gay man.
I didn't know that. You were separate in a different area.
Yes. They even make you wear a different type colored jumpsuit.
Whoa, so it's public to everybody.
Yeah, the colors, yeah, definitely. Some of them may know what it means, some may not, because if they put you in administrative segregate, it can mean many things. It can mean to protect you. You could be a witness for another type of case.
Oh, it wasn't just this is the gay color.
But no.
Okay, that's what I thought you meant. I was like, what?
No, that's not a gay color. I never thought about
like
that.
Like the pink triangle. Okay.
But definitely a different color suit. I think everyone else wore orange. I wore red. And
so you were separated with, I thought you meant that you were separated with all the gay people, but it's separated for many different reasons.
Many different reasons, but it's obvious that they're separating me out because I'm gay and sort of keeping me in general populations. But that varies from facility to facility, from jail to prison, because prisons and jails are two different things. I mean, in some ways, some people look at that as protection, and maybe it is, depending on the facility. Because you don't want to be in danger. And so in some way, it's like a way of protecting you, but it's very isolating.
I wonder about how, time moved while you're in prison, especially since I imagine if you were going to be there for 10 years, you would kind of settle in, right, and, make it a home. But for 6 months, I just wonder if you were just, counting the days, or did, time move quickly, fast, slow? What was that like?
You're absolutely right. I was definitely counting the days. 6 months, it felt like a long time. It was 180 days. I always say it's 180 days I'll never get back in my life. But I had a lot of time to think and a lot of sunrise and sunsets that I would be able to see through the window, but not be able to just fully go outside and embrace it. And so, yes, I definitely counted down the days because I was trying to get I wanted to get back home to my grandmother, who was elderly, and I was one of the people who was there to help support and take care of her and the household. And so it was important for me to get back and try to figure out what I was going to do with my life, because this was not supposed to happen, at least in what I thought for myself and what my family has invested in me. This was not supposed to happen, but it did. And I had to eventually try to figure that out.
And so, as you said, you wanted to put this behind you. 6 months, okay, I'm going to get out and I'm never going to have to think about this again. But then you were added to the sex offender registry.
Yes. And again, another thing that I had to try to navigate as well.
And I believe that as being a part of the registry, you had to notify the community and your neighbors that you're on this list, right? Did that entail then having to out yourself as having HIV to them?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're talking about people from my church. My church was in my community. I could literally walk down the street to my church. And so people knew me through church. They knew me through school. They just knew my family just through community. And so these are the people, as well as the broader city or town people that, and even beyond, that I'm sending this notification out, which explains that I'm living with HIV, but also someone that had been convicted of a charge relating to HIV. Yeah. At least the charge was titled intentional exposure to AIDS. So that even, just mentioning that just sort of elevated this thing even more. And so, yes, and paying a lot of fees just to put my picture in the city paper. So it's the community notification cards as well as your photo, and so
and those cards are put in people's mailboxes.
Yes,
wow,
absolutely.
So they can't avoid that. They might skip the paper.
No, they cannot. So either you're going to see it in the paper, or you're going to get a note, a card in the mail.
Did that change how people treated you, at church and places?
I actually stopped going to church. I think I was just in a different headspace at that time, coming out of the prison, and just in a whole different headspace. And I just felt very isolated and to myself. It's something that I think back, because I always went to church. In some ways, I still went out into the world because I had to, but I stopped going to church. And so I think, yeah, things changed for me. And then things were also happening quickly, too, in terms of just sort of me rebuilding my life back together. I started volunteering and then connecting with someone who was been involved around this issue of HIV criminalization. And so I was just sort of moving into a whole nother space and just sort of, I don't know what to call that. I was just in a different space where people I might have connected with, they became fewer and fewer.
Yeah. What else did being on the sex offender registry entail? How else did it impact your life? Oh,
yeah. I should mention that in Louisiana at that time, it required it to have sex offender on your driver's license. And so that in some way limited, what I could do as far as going out. I was trying to have some sort of normal social life at the places that I would attend. But there were moments where I had to present the ID, like at the doctor's office, or even at a bar. And I was so embarrassed, very embarrassed. I remember sweating and just feeling just out of sorts. And the treatment in that, how probation officers or how law enforcement officers speak to you, it's just awful. It's awful because you're not looked at as a person. You're kind of just looked at as, treated as if you're, I don't know, dirty or less than. Also, the other part of it makes it, I remember one time I tried to get an apartment and the people were not mean, but they was like, well, we can't lease an apartment to you until you get this off. And that was another moment where I realized this is another barrier that I have to deal with in life in terms of if I try to find a place to live or a job, now I have to give this backstory.
I think that the general public thinks of the sex offender registry as this place for violent offenders, right? Mm-hmm. People that we need to be protected from. But there was a analysis by the Williams Institute from a couple of years ago that Louisiana, where you lived, that 63% of those on Louisiana's sex offender registry were there solely due to HIV-related convictions.
Yeah.
So over half.
Over half.
So, and also we should say like that disproportionately affects LGBTQ people and people of color.
Absolutely. And you have to know that those populations or communities are represented there. It's almost like, well, there's no, accountability or that we're actually doing harm to those communities. But I can tell you that we are in there.
Yeah.
Our lives are being impacted in more ways than one. Because I want people to know that some people that are on the registry, that is the only reason why they're on there. The only reason.
So you talked about how it affected housing and employment. After you got out of prison, like where did you live? Where did you work?
Well, I was at home. Thankfully, I was still able to be at home. And so in some way, I was just lucky or protected or is the words that come up for now. And I've sort of navigated that walk very carefully as I've moved about because I've lived in D.C., I've lived in Pennsylvania, New York, and those are three states, if you will, that, including Louisiana, that I have sort of gone through different processes of registry, and they all work differently. And so it makes it hard that if you wanted to relocate anywhere, that you have to sort of do the preliminary work to figure out is it safe going there under this condition? Is it going to be worse than where you're coming from? It's really complicated. It makes it hard, and it's even hard if you're living in a space where your life is hard and you're trying to move forward, and that doesn't seem very possible because of just whatever's going on where you're trying to go.
And eventually, you moved to New York City. What did you learn about how New York handles its sex offender registry?
One thing I would say I appreciate about the New York City process is that they allow you to go through a process where they're going to do their thing in terms of pulling records and making determination through the board examiner's office whether you should register. But they also give you a chance to say why you shouldn't have to be on the registry. And so I did appreciate that because at least allowed me to have a voice versus being sort of the narrative being described for me and not from me.
That's a really lovely way to frame it, but they kept you on the list, and it was a longer, quote-unquote, sentence than on the list than Louisiana. It was 15 years versus 20 years here, right?
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that because that's currently where I am right now. And so in my mind, I thought that long as I register or in compliance wherever I went, counting, 15 years, that would count. And so I actually lost credit after I relocated from Louisiana, but I didn't understand the law that way then because it's not like someone really tells you. Because most people, even lawyers, don't quite understand it. So it's something you really have to sit with and discuss.
We have different laws in different states. And what you were accused of doing in Louisiana, having sex with somebody without disclosing HIV status, is not a crime in New York.
Right.
So what is the attorney general's here reasoning for keeping you on the registry here then?
They would say that, well, it's because of what happened, because Louisiana said so. So whatever that state said, and so they basically just went along with whatever the state is saying, and without even sort of looking into who I was as a person to see whether or not I was actually a threat. And I think the Attorney General's office, as well as DAs, and maybe even the courts, they don't want to, I guess, set a bad precedent. I guess if they didn't allow me to register, regardless of whether they had laws and what, because that's a good argument. You don't have these laws, so why would you allow this person? But then some will look at it that, you left the state to just try to avoid the registry. And I'm like, well, if you knew me, you would see my record that I've been complying with every place that I've been in. So again, they're not doing that work. So it's just easier to say, well, if this state said this, so we're going to abide because our laws will support what another state is doing.
Yeah, I guess it's just confusing. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but, Louisiana says you are this, dangerous person. And then New York, based on their laws. Then you move to New York State, and New York State's like, well, we don't have those laws, and so Robert's not dangerous here, just legally speaking. It's like, but we're going to keep him on this list and actually extend the amount of time we're on it.
And to go back to the question you asked me in terms of the law. Yeah. So I completed 15 years technically, but now that I registered in New York, I didn't realize that I was basically starting the clock over with 20 years.
Wait. From the beginning?
From the beginning in 2014. Yeah.
Wait. Sorry. It's not 15 plus 5. It's starting 20 from zero?
In New York, yes. I didn't know, I didn't realize that at the time.
Whoa.
So I'm actually on the registry
Yeah.
in general 10 additional more years than I would need it to be.
Whoa.
Yeah, and we've tried to address that here in New York State, and unfortunately, the highest court didn't bother to want to hear it.
So the clock starts over once you move here.
Yeah, pretty
Whoa.
much. So I basically have, well, not at least nine and a half or a little under 9 years left to go. So I'm basically in limbo, just on the registry, and the law, they're not really trying to do right by me as a person. Instead, they're standing on whatever is written in black and white, about the charge and conviction. And so that's why we have to work really hard to address these laws.
Yeah.
And also do that work to show the human side of people, because that is what the personhood is being stripped away.
And so when did you find your way to advocacy?
I found my way to advocacy because I didn't really know what I was going to do. And I remember the counselor in prison was telling me, see that cylinder on the wall, that block, this experience is just that one cylinder. It's not the whole wall. And that made sense to me then. And so I think it's just the fight in me, the curiosity that has always been in me. I immediately went online. My friend picked me up from prison at midnight. I think we went to Walmart. I ate food and I got online, I guess, to try to acclimate myself back to society. And I may have typed in HIV criminalization or something to that, because I didn't know that's HIV criminalization. And I found a blog written by a longtime activist, Sean Stroop, wrote about HIV Criminalization 101. And I remember reading that.
Oh, sorry. He wrote a really fantastic memoir, Body Counts.
Yeah, he did. And I read that blog, and after reading, I was like, this sounds just like what happened to me. And I immediately called him. I called the number and connected with him. And believe it or not, he was just in New Orleans. I was in Kenner. And if anybody knows South Louisiana, those places are not very far from each other, maybe 30 minutes, if that. And he was heading back to New York after being down there on vacation. We didn't know each other at all. And I connected with him that day, and we have been connected ever since. And we co-founded the Zero Project together, as well as other things regarding the Zero Project. And so that is how it started.
Wow.
It's just, out of just the curiosity, just the natural curiosity that I have, and just wanting to find answers as to why this happened and how did it happen.
And when we say HIV criminalization laws, your case is just one example. Can you just talk about what those kind of, what that means and what those kind of look like more nationally?
Yeah, so my situation is just one of many. There's many sort of derivatives of these type of experiences that happen. There is no perfect case, if you will, because some people, we are out there looking for the perfect cases. Some of these experiences are people who, if they happen to be involved in sex work and having to be arrested and they test positive for HIV, now their sentence can be enhanced as a result of their HIV status. And so the same can happen for people who are injecting drug users by, in fact, using needles, and if they are test positive for HIV. So we have sentence enhancements for those people. There are also general criminal laws where people living with HIV have been prosecuted. And then we also have HIV-specific laws, which is just the law specifically mentions HIV. And so that is what I was convicted under. It's an HIV-specific law. And in some states, they may require the registry, and that's at least 5 states that do.
Tell me this. What state has the harshest HIV criminalization law?
Oh, It's a good question because honestly, they're all are harsh. But if I would say the hot spots. I'll go there. Tennessee would be one. Um, However, Tennessee, the people who are convicted of the HIV criminal exposure no longer have to be on the sex offense law there in that state. So that's a good thing. Florida would have been it's another hotspot state. And it depends on the group. If you're like part of the sex work community, or obviously if you're black, gay, generally those communities are prosecuted. Ohio would be another one. Missouri would be another. Arkansas, mainly most of the southern states, definitely. Washington State is still an issue. But definitely the southern states because, again, HIV is so prevalent there, and most of those states have either HIV-specific law.
Wow. Well, I live in this bubble where we know what HIV is, how you get it, how you don't get it. And so I'm a little out of touch, let's say, about like what the general public like thinks about this thing. Like what are like the myths? What are the stigmas you still hear from people?
Well, I think people still think you can die from HIV, and maybe in some way, yes, if you're not have access to the proper health care needs. Most people, as I say, it's not necessarily a death sentence, but it's a prison sentence today. Many people think HIV is no longer a thing because they don't really see anything about it, in the news. And if they do, it's either someone being accused of exposing someone. People need to be informed about where we are today because right now they automatically think back in the 80s and 90s. And HIV is not over. It's not over because those of us that have been able to live long and healthy lives, we're still here. We still need our access to our medications. But people who are negative also need to know what's available for them, which is PrEP and PEP. And so these are drugs that can prevent you from contracting HIV in any instance if you may have had an exposure. So that is what people need to know. They need to not – we're living in an age of misinformation, and so folks really need to understand the facts and the science around HIV, and it's available to them if they choose to seek it out.
Yeah. Speaking personally, you're living with HIV, then you have this, experience where this partner accuses you of something you didn't do. How did all of that change how, you just experience and have sex?
Oh, I think I've been through all the different phases of this thing in terms of how desirable I feel or how others may view me. I'll just say this. I have no animosity towards him at all. I don't think I ever carried it from day one. I also recognize this issue was bigger than he and I, which is why I'm doing what I'm doing. And I always say I think he did what he felt he had to do. And I've paid the price for that. But now I'm doing what I feel like I need to do. But it has really changed my life. It's changed how I view myself as in terms of being worthy. It changed the way that I see myself as someone who used to be very, I guess in some way I still am, but I used to just be very ambitious. And I feel like in some way it kind of has dampened my ability to dream and have ambition because I'm still bound by the registry issue. And I know people may look at my life and be like, wow, but you did all these things. But these are the things that sit with me at night. Will I be able to make a living? Will I be able to have my own space without having to answer all these questions and give backstories? Like these are things that many people who go through the experience think about, And so I just got tired. And I think in some way I still am tired. But I am taking on a new approach to things. I'm able to talk about it. I'm able to write about it. And hopefully show the world what this experience is like. And so it's things like that gives me hope and makes me feel of value because I need to speak out. And I think if I did not, then the state would have won because those that enforce this type of experience on people, we're not meant to be talking. And so I appreciate you having me here. To share my experience and just to talk about this issue because this does not happen a lot. Usually people are very embarrassed and they're hurting, they've been traumatized and they don't even have a voice to even articulate how they feel. So, yeah.
Of course. One more question, then I'll let you go. But a couple years ago, I interviewed Peter Staley, former member of ACT UP, and he said that we were on course to have a cure for HIV in his lifetime. And he's 60, right? So, 20, 30 years, not to anticipate his death. I just wonder, do you know if that timeline is still accurate given the cuts to research and funding that the current administration has done?
That is a good question. I don't know specifically, but I will say this, that by this happening at this juncture, right when we're like really have pushed forward and made some great advancements, this is going to set us back. And it's going to globally, it's going to set us back, especially if we don't figure out how to come up with the funding to continue. Will philanthropy organizations help us? Will businesses help us? Like fill in the gaps where the government or the U.S., or at least at this time, is choosing not to step up or fully fund. And so it's going to set us back, and people's lives some people will die. Some people's lives will be impacted. Some people will be incarcerated. Some people will not have access to the care that they need, especially if our states aren't able to pick up the budget or enforce budgets that are going to be strong enough to take care of our needs in the way that we've been supported. And so I know that may sound extreme, but if you ask me like what those are things that could potentially happen. And you may not realize that if it's not your life, and I feel like more people will probably become diagnosed as well if they don't have access to PrEP. And so there's a lot of things that will happen, but I'm hoping that businesses and philanthropy, that they'll step up and help us out.
Thank you for the great conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Jeffrey.
And that is Robert Suttle. You can find out more about him on his website at robertsuttle.com. And then, as always, I want to remind you that we do have a Substack newsletter, and it would mean a lot to me if you were to join us there and sign up. That's a great place to find out about future episodes, to recommend guests, and also learn about these behind-the-scenes moments. We've got pictures from today's interview on there right now. And so if you want to sign up and subscribe, there is a link in our show notes. It is free to join, but yes, there is a paid option if you're able to support the work we do here financially. We've been doing this podcast since 2016. Oh my God. And with your support, with your help, that can ensure that these podcasts and these interviews can remain online and free for our entire community. We want to avoid paywalls as much as possible, right? So thank you so much to everyone who has joined us there. Thank you for your support. Once again, there is a link to the LGBT Q&A Substack in our show notes. I'll see you there. All right, I'm Jeffrey Masters. I'm on Instagram at JeffMasters1. I'll see you next time.